Opa! There's BG! Hi B-Look! Alright everyone, hello. And now today I really want to talk about, while we still have a couple weeks of Lent left at least, about my favorite dinners to make during the Lenten season. What? Yeah. What? I'm not paying enough attention to you. Oh my goodness. Or if you've checked out the Christian Witch tier on my Patreon, then you know that that's where I talk about a lot of Christian kind of stuff, including things like Lent. And as a kitchen witch, Lent is important because as a Christian witch, it impacts how I cook my dinner. So as a Christian kitchen witch, let me tell you a little bit about the meals that I like the most for Lent and how they can be used to do all kinds of different things, as well as what then I end up eating on Easter. So to start off, one of the most traditional things to eat, at least in my area of town during Lent, is the fish fry. I'm sure there are plenty of places that have enough Catholics that this happens, but during Lent, because it's, a time of fasting and spiritual, renewal, there is a rule that on Ash Wednesday, and then also every Friday until Easter, you can't eat meat. And so for Catholics, that means red meat, which means things like fish are still totally fine on the table. For others like Orthodox, that means no animal products at all, including meat, eggs, fish, dairy, all of it. So you're basically vegan for like 40 days. And Lent is that time where where as Christians, we're reflecting on that little moment before Jesus gets crucified. So obviously, right, it wasn't just that Jesus was having a great time and then hit the cross, it was that, there was a big spooky build-up up to that, and so Lent is this 40 days from Ash Wednesday to, Easter, where we remember that from dust we were made, to dust we return. It's a time to, repent anything we've done wrong, which, since none of us are perfect, there's a lot of things that maybe we've, said harsh words to people, we've done bad things, whatever it is, this is our time to kind of, make amends for it, and then move on and leave it in the past and move forward in spring, totally renewed and ready for a great rest of the year. Now, of course, this does mean that your schedule shakes up a little bit, so it means I have to be conscious of the fact that every Friday there is no meat to be eaten, no turkey sandwiches, no normal spaghetti for dinner, none of that kind of stuff. I gotta think of all of it anew again. And since it's honestly not that many weeks, I think it's like 6 to 7 Fridays that I gotta think about it, there are some things that I really, really like to make, and some things that are really, really good for a few key themes, like power and success and energy, as well as love and, relationship building, and also just, plain old comfort and growth and protection. So without further ado, let me show you my favorite recipes that I make pretty much every single Friday going forward during Lent. Now again, right, that fish fry is really just exactly what it sounds like. You take some white fish, you batter it up, you fry it up, serve it with a side of fries. There you go. Fish and chips. We love a good fish and chip. In fact, the fact that I've gotten this far into Lent and not had a fish and chip yet is really upsetting. So I'm going to have to fix that. Nonetheless, that's not really like the easiest thing to make at home, and so the things I make at home instead usually end up being a lot less work, but still delicious. The first thing I make, and I feel like I just almost kick off, Lent with this a little bit, is salmon. I really don't get salmon that often because it is really expensive, but like during Lent, I just feel like since we're getting into more fish-based, and especially because my boyfriend doesn't really like white fish that much, salmon is a must. We both love salmon, and around this time of year is when a lot of the stores, because they know Lent is happening, they end up giving us some pretty good coupons for fish, so I usually end up grabbing some. Hand jail for stupid. Hand jail for stupid. Yeah, relax. Calm down. And now I make salmon a bunch of different ways, but my favorite way of making salmon, my personal favorite, is honestly like an herb-crusted baked salmon. My boyfriend's favorite is a more like honey-glazed, a kind of Asian style salmon. I'll usually do the latter just because the fresh herb one is more summer, because that's when all my herbs in the garden are actually there. So I can't really do it now because it's the middle of spring, and so I'll end up defaulting to the more like honey, ginger, garlic glaze for it, but it's super easy. You just kind of make that marinade, let it sit, and then you go ahead, put it aside with like a bed of rice or something, and it's just so good. And again, there's a lot of really good magic to be had in that, right? So we've got honey, ginger, garlic, We've got sugar, right? The salmon itself, which in multiple cultures, especially like Celtic culture, is known as a kind of psychic enhancer almost. There is a lot going on in that meal. The golden honey brings sweetness to whatever it is you're trying to do, really ramps up any kind of optimism or luck, not necessarily monetary, although it can be, but just luck in general. And then the garlic for protection, for once again wealth, for driving away evil, and the ginger just boosting the power of both of those things. It's really, really good for that start of Lent, you know, success, we're gonna do this, we're gonna drive away all of the bad and leave nothing but space for the new kind of energy. Really, really good to start Lent with that. And since the bags I get from my big box store usually have like 2 dinners worth of it, I end up using that for like Ash Wednesday week specifically, so that Wednesday I make it once, we don't have any leftovers, but then I still have the other half of the bag. Friday I make it again. That's week 1 handled. My second favorite thing to make, which I just make repeatedly, all the time, constantly, is shrimp and peppers. Now, if you've ever seen, my recipes blog, if you checked out my blog, actually, there's a ton of recipes on there that I release a new one like every other week, so you can sign up for my newsletter and you will get one of these every other week in your inbox. But basically, if you've checked that out, you might have seen something called sausage and peppers, which is a more Italian-style dish. Turns out you can make pretty much the exact same thing, but replace the sausage with shrimp. And it doesn't sound like it would work, but it actually does. It works really, really well. And in fact, the shrimp almost give it this kind of like seafood kind of stew flavor that really, really works, because it's a tomato-based sauce with a lot of curry powder, with peppers, with onions, and then with some shrimp, which are like just super delicious little bites, right? Sometimes fish has a very specific flavor. Shrimp doesn't really have that flavor, but it's got that nice firm texture. There are a lot of them in the average bag I get from BJ's, and there's usually a coupon for them. And it's just such an easy meal to make. I mean, you really just stew it all together and then make some rice on the side, and you still have a super high protein meal that's really filling and makes a decent amount of leftovers. Now, since we're using curry powder, there's a lot of different spices in your average curry powder blend, so you can do a lot. This is a very versatile dish for magic. If you wanted to use the peppers and the tomato in this, and also like a little bit of cinnamon for a more romantic, like spicing up love kind of feel, if you wanted to use it to kind of deepen or make more exciting your relationships, if you wanted to use it to protect yourself and your loved ones, right, with the pepper and the other things in the curry powder, if you wanted to, invoke that onion as well for protection, it does the same thing as the garlic. If you wanted to invoke all the things in curry powder for success and for wealth and for power, and especially call the rice into it as well, you could do that. This is pretty much the like one-stop shop meal for magic that can do anything you're normally wanting it to do on a daily basis. Keeping in mind that Fridays are also the day for love magic, yeah, Lenten Fridays can absolutely be an interesting time to do love magic, because if we know that Lent is all about repenting things we've done wrong, and Fridays are really good for love spells, you might think of Fridays during Lent as a time to work on relationship issues that may have been ignored or not talked about for the rest of the year. And something like shrimp and peppers, which is full of these really bright, bold, almost spicy flavors if you're putting in like spicy peppers like Carolina Reaper, yeah, they can absolutely open doors that you maybe were trying to keep shut and pretend were not there. If you were trying to put a rug over the attic door of problems in a relationship, this meal can absolutely help you open them back up. But why would I want to do that? Because communication is good. Even if I don't get to making fish and chips during a typical Lent, something I do need to make during a typical Lent, because it is easy enough, it is accessible enough, and it's absolutely a classic to my area specifically, is clam chowder. Clam chowder is so insanely good. It's so good. And so, like, there are different types. In my state specifically, in Rhode Island, there is a special kind of Rhode Island chowder. It's like a more clear chowder, but the other types you're going to see are the more New York tri-state area red chowder, or the classic Boston white chowder. And I really haven't seen anyone offer Rhode Island chowder, honestly. Like, everywhere I've gone my whole life, it's either been red chowder, which is thin and more tomato based and more like an actual soup, or white chowder, which is made with milk and it's a lot creamier and richer, and like, God, it's got potatoes and carrots and all these other things in it. It's just so oftentimes, I will at least once go all out and make some clam chowder. And if I'm feeling really extra, and especially because my boyfriend likes them a lot, I'll also get some oil in a pan and make some clam cakes. It's really not that hard to make clam cakes. It's kind of like just making a thicker pancake batter that has chopped clams in it and clam juice. and then just dropping them in the fryer and making basically like almost like little clam donuts. They're basically clam donuts. Clam donuts, but like pancake batter, so they just drop in the oil and fry. Nonetheless, because this has a lot going on in it, this could also be a very good relationship building one, right? Because it's got things like carrots, which are good for fertility. It's got clams. Clams are frequently known as an aphrodisiac. It's also got milk, right? Milk, which is if coming from a cow, and another sign of fertility. It has to do with the moon, right? All these kinds of things. And it's got onion, which I know we said that onion's all about protection and maybe even earning a little bit of wealth, but it also has to do with lust. So after you fix your relationship with shrimp and peppers, you can then continue to grow it, I guess, with clam chowder. But likewise, and especially if you're pairing it with, say, like clam cakes, which are full of good wheat and stuff, or if you're just getting oyster crackers to throw on top, when you're throwing wheat into the mix at all, and if also you're invoking potatoes, if also you're invoking the onion for money reasons, the sudden combination of wheat and milk and all these other things, I mean, making an entire stew with milk makes it really, really good for wealth magic, for gain, for prosperity. And again, because it is such a rich, hearty meal, it's got like fried things that go along with it, and even without, it's basically potatoes boiled in milk. It's also great for healing, for calm and peace, for comfort, all these other kinds of things. So it's a really great one if you, in your reflections have just gotten really down in your feels and need a really hearty, warm, comforting pick-me-up. Bonus meal, just because it's easy and it is involving no kind of seafood at all. If all of these last ones that had seafood in it were not up your alley because you don't like fish, you don't like shrimp, you don't like clams, there is another option, and that is shakshuka. Shakshuka is a Middle Eastern dish, and it's one that's usually eaten as like a breakfast of some kind, which is wild to me because it's very hefty. I really exclusively eat this for dinner. But what it is basically is onions and peppers kind of stir-fried together in a tomato sauce that's I usually put in like cinnamon, oregano, garlic, onion, maybe a little bit of spice, turmeric, and ginger. And so with that, right, you stew all that together until those flavors kind of blend together, and then you make some wells in the sauce, and you crack in just raw egg. So when I make a big pan of it for my boyfriend and I'm usually doing 6 eggs, so like 3 eggs each, and you put a lid on it and literally just let it poach in that sauce until they're done. And then you serve it with some fresh bread, some feta cheese sprinkled on top if you'd like, and it's really just good. Nice and tangy and savory. No seafood in it at all if you're allergic to seafood, and it's just really quick and easy. And again, it can be made for breakfast, it can be made for dinner, and it's a one-pot meal that's done in honestly like half an hour. It's also very filling because the bulk of it's coming from vegetables and then eggs. So this is a great one, honestly, because eggs are a traditional symbol of birth, right, with Easter eggs and all that, but specifically rebirth, okay? The coming out of the egg, all that kind of stuff. It's ruled by Pluto. It's very much a death and rebirth kind of symbol, and one that in Lent, when we are trying to rebirth ourselves for spring, basically, is very apt. And likewise, again, you've got those protective things going on too. The shell of the egg is protective, and so is the onion, and so are the peppers, and so is, any of the spices you'd put in. Cinnamon's great for protection, as is any spicy pepper. So those are the things I like to eat the most during Lent, and those are the things I'm usually thinking about. But then, of course, when it comes to Easter itself, I, as a Slovenian American, have very specific traditions for Easter. My boyfriend does too. My boyfriend is Ukrainian, and of course, depending on who we go to is depending on what tradition we're following for Easter. And while the traditions are similar because they're both Slavic peoples, they're not the same. So with Slovenians, the most important thing to have on our table is potica. Potica is a Slovenian like walnut roll. It can also be made with like cottage cheese and tarragon, or with poppy seeds, or with anything else, but traditionally the area that my family's from makes it with walnut. And it's a really good pastry to have like with coffee in the morning. It's like basically just a really rich, sweet walnut paste rolled into a yeast dough, and it's just so good, made with rum and raisins, sometimes with honey. So delicious. And you pair that, of course, with your typical Easter eggs, boiled colored eggs, and with some kind of sausage or ham, and then alongside that ham you have mustard, you have horseradish, you have all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, honestly, I used to think that Lent was, like, the worst because you had to be so conscious of it back then, and, like, or at least I did, I guess, as a kid, had to be so conscious about not eating meat and blah, 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 blah. But the reality is, I mean, practicing Lent as an adult, it's really not that big of a deal. It's just something to keep in mind, and it's important to remember the symbolism of why we don't eat meat on Lent. which is to basically pay some kind of honor to Christ's sacrifice. You don't eat red meat because Jesus died on the cross. So that red meat kind of symbolizes Jesus in a way. You abstain from it because you are doing that in respect to his death on the cross. But there are plenty of meals that you can make throughout Lent that are still pretty high protein, that are still pretty flavorful, and that don't really make you feel like you're missing out on that much. And even if this were to be done in like the more orthodox version where you don't eat any animal products for 40 days, there are still tons of types of cuisine that are purely vegan that are super flavorful. I mean, chickpea masala is really, really good. So yeah, that's just a little bit of an overview of what I eat during Lent as a kitchen witch, as a Christian kitchen witch. See ya.